I worked with someone that used to work for Wizards of the Coast, right? Actually, during the period during which they bought D&D and went from being all Magic the Gathering to being Magic the Gathering and D&D. So before Hasbro came along and bought them. And something that he said, which I think is true of a lot of things, is that everything helps D&D. And what he meant by this was it didn't matter what tabletop RPG you played, eventually you would play D&D. And in my experience, that's largely been true. There are obviously holdouts. I currently play D&D with someone who hadn't played D&D for the first 12 years of her RPG experience. But even there, eventually she played D&D. And why is this? What does this mean? There are certain genres, certain hobbies, certain industries where there is such a strong, established frontrunner that if you enter into these genres or hobbies, that eventually, probably, you are going to at least try out the frontrunner, the winner. So it can actually be beneficial for the person or group or a company in that position to try to grow the space as a whole. If Wizards of the Coast grows the concept of tabletop RPGs, it benefits them because everyone eventually plays D&D. So even if you're playing Shadowrun, even if you're playing Cyberpunk, even if you're playing GURPS, you're eventually probably going to play D&D. So money well spent, because eventually it comes back and it helps Wizards of the Coast. In video games, I think there are a few examples of this sort of thing. In MMOs, that is WoW, because chances are eventually you're going to play WoW. Maybe you will graduate from WoW to a different MMO, maybe you will start a different MMO and come to WoW, but somewhere in your MMO career, you are probably going to play WoW. For looter shooters, that's Destiny. You're probably going to play Destiny if you enjoy looter shooter as a genre. Now, you might just find out you don't like looter shooters as a genre at all, but if you do, chances are you're going to make your way to Destiny at some point for at least a little while. Why does this matter? For me, it matters because the game in that leader position often is relatively unassailable. People used to talk about making WoW killers, and it's very difficult to kill WoW because they have such an established position that they are able to fight you dollar for dollar on almost any topic, on almost any front. It's similarly with Destiny. They have years more experience in the space over a new contender. So when you are going in to a space that has a everyone always will play X, you have to be really careful, and I would really caution you away from saying we are going to make an X killer, because chances are you're not making an X killer. You're going to make something that will introduce a few new interesting ideas that X will then come along and steal, and then you're back to where you started. You can see this with Fortnite and the other Battle Royale games. Battle Royale games come out, introduce interesting features, and then Fortnite quickly fast follows and lets other companies do their research for them. Now, am I saying you should just stay away from these genres completely? Absolutely not, because before WoW came out, Everquest was the game eventually everyone played. And certainly Blizzard didn't listen to this advice and made an Everquest killer, and then WoW became the game in MMOs that everyone eventually played. But if you actually look at what Blizzard actually did, they didn't really make an Everquest killer. They made something different. And that's what I would recommend, is if you're entering into these spaces, if you're making a tabletop RPG, don't make a D&D killer. Make something that explores part of the space that D&D isn't currently exploring. If you're making an Everquest killer, you make WoW, which is more colorful, more accessible. It's different. And by different, I don't mean one single easy to replicate feature. I mean either a whole bunch of features or, even better, a fundamental philosophical difference between what you're doing in your game and the game that's in the current leader's position. You want something that the leader can't replicate without actually endangering their current position, something that would fundamentally change the character of their game in order to copy. That is what's going to actually let you be different than that game that's in the leader position. And sometimes that is going to be what wins, and you actually sort of kill the current frontrunner as a side effect. But often what will happen is it's actually just a space where you can exist and not have to be the frontrunner. When you look at something like Eve is in a very comfortable position. It is not a WoW killer at all, but it does stuff that WoW doesn't do, nor will WoW attempt to do, and is able to be a strong MMO in a space on its own. This concept is not a universal one. When you look at some genres, I would argue RPGs are like this, shooters are like this, the top is much more contested. And in those cases, there's a lot more room for that discussion. Sometimes it's more contested because best isn't as clear. The difference between COD and Battlefield is in part because they have different philosophies about the way that the gameplay should be. And those seem to be both equally valid philosophies, or at least philosophies that appeal to fairly large different groups. Now, I might argue that shooters are actually a red ocean, but of course, now that I've said red ocean out loud, I'm probably gonna have to do a video defining what red ocean and blue ocean means, and looking for blue oceans and all the other various things that come along with that. But suffice it to say that just because there isn't a clear dominant leader doesn't necessarily mean that it's clear sailing for your game in that marketplace. In fact, in some cases, it's actually worse. So not every genre, not every kind of game is going to have a winner and a bunch of games that live in the shadow of that winner. But some of them do exist, and I guess what this video ultimately is saying is X killer is usually a sign that you are entering into a space that has a clear winner. And if you are trying to build a killer of an existing frontrunner, you have a hard slog ahead of you. And my recommendation, my caution would be, rather than trying to do that, maybe build a game that can live within the rain shadow of that game, serve to introduce new people into the genre or game type, or alternatively catch people that are churning out of the winner's genre or game type because you can offer something more. I'm not sure if this video is actually making any sense, but if it did, let me know down in the comments. A special thanks to my members. They provide the resources that this channel needs to keep running. If you are interested in becoming a member, there's a link down in the description. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up because that will tell YouTube that people enjoyed it. I will see you again soon. Thank you.